So welcome to the latest webinar in our Engineerica Education Keynote series. We're very pleased to be bringing you this complimentary presentation. For those of you who are new to us, Engineerica specializes in academic center management systems for higher education. And you might be familiar with our software applications such as AccuTrack, Accudemia, and AccuCampus. And I do want to give a special welcome to any Engineerica clients joining us today. And for those of you who are not yet clients, I do want to just briefly let you know that we are offering a complimentary fall trial of our most popular center management system, Accudemia. This gives you the opportunity to use Accudemia for an entire semester risk-free to see if it helps make management of your center and data collection easier. If you're interested, you can send me an email at rachelc@engineerica.com and I will just quickly paste that into the chat. So we started this keynote series for our clients and contacts who wanted to learn more about best practices and trends in higher education. Each month we feature a distinguished speaker to talk about topics, hot topics in the academic support field. Our next keynote is going to be on June 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern. Corey Hammond will be our presenter. He will be presenting on teaching metacognitive techniques, and you can register for that session early using this link here. But now on to this month's session. A quick introduction to myself. I'm Rachel Cook. I'm a client success manager with Engineerica. I was previously a learning center manager for 6 years. So like you all, I am very passionate about higher education and student success. I also have with me Nick Armstrong, one of our technical support specialists, who's here as my backup and also to help with any technical issues that may come up. And now I am pleased to introduce you to this month's speaker. Michael Frizell, MFA, is the Director of Student Learning Services at Missouri State University, where he serves as co-director of the Bear Claw, the Center for Learning and Writing. Additionally, Michael serves as an adjunct faculty member for the Theater and Dance Department and teaches a capstone course in writing for the Honors College. Michael earned the National College Learning Center Association Certified Learning Center Professional Lifetime Achievement designation in 2012. Since then, Michael has been the editor of the Learning Assistance Review and CLCA's peer-reviewed journal, which seeks to foster communication among higher education learning center professionals by publishing 3 issues a year. During the COVID-19 crisis in 2020, he published a collection of essays, Rising to the Challenge, Navigating COVID-19 as Higher Education Learning Center Leaders, which described how learning center leaders reacted to campus-wide shutdowns. Michael's commitment to a servant leadership philosophy is evidenced in his extensive institutional service and commitment to professional organizations for the past 23 years. His creative work for Tidal Wave Comics also consists of creating graphic novels about famous musicians, athletes, politicians, and actors while writing several fiction titles. So needless to say, we are so excited to have Michael with us, and I am now going to hand things over to him.
Great, thank you. And I need to share my screen now, don't I?
Yep, I just made you a presenter.
You did. And can you see me?
Yep, we can see you.
All right, and the screen looks good?
Oh yeah.
Great. So they already did a little bit of an introduction to me. And the reason that I put in a screen here about introducing myself was, like most of you, I imagine that when you assumed your role as a learning center director or someone responsible for hiring employees in your space, you were given absolutely zero training on how to do that. I may be making an assumption that's wrong, but at my school, when I was moved from faculty to a staff position, I was given the writing center with an empty room, no history documents, no materials to help with training, no staff, and they said, well, you know, just fix it and see how it goes. At one point, my dean, when I asked what my budget was, he said, oh, just spend until I tell you to stop. I don't know why higher ed sometimes does things like this, but it just seems like that's the way things went. And we tried a lot of things at the Learning Center here at Missouri State University to find the right employees for our space. So as I talk a little bit about that today, I want to talk about the student employees that I need to find every semester. So what I'm looking for first is supplemental instruction leaders. That is our fastest growing area. We have that divided into 2 ways. We don't call it SI or supplemental instruction at Missouri State. Many schools have changed the name because, well, our faculty didn't like it. It sounded like we were hiring lecturers or someone else rather than student support personnel. So we call them PASS leaders, peer assisted study session leaders. And before COVID, probably at our height, I had something close to 45 different courses, not the sections, just the courses that we were supporting. Past leaders were paid 10 hours a base per week, and then they got an extra couple hours for planning, pre-test sessions, working with faculty behind the scenes in different ways, emergency meetings, that sort of thing. When COVID hit, I had to find a model where students weren't embedded directly into the classroom. So we called them course mentors. Because they weren't embedded, they were rather following material behind the scenes, and it wasn't live or synchronous. We went with 5 hours base per week and then 2 hours extra for pre-test sessions. And then I need to hire a graduate assistant to help me organize them out in the field. And he or she will get about 20 hours a week. For the writing and presentation centers, I also, including the consultants, I also follow writing fellows and public speaking fellows. These are specialized support consultants attached to a class who are aiding faculty who maybe don't understand the writing process, or for the first time want to have a public speaking component added, and they'd like to have some support. So my fellows work behind the scenes with faculty to craft a meaningful piece for the end of the semester, and then they work with all of the students in that particular class 2 or 3 times during the semester to ensure a quality project at the end. And then, of course, I have a graduate assistant who helps me there, one for the writing center and one for the presentation center. I hire absent professor prefects. I did not come up with that name. My student workers did. I think they watched too much Harry Potter movies or read the books too much, but an absent professor prefect may be something that you do at your school, where you have a student who goes to a classroom and does a presentation on like a don't cancel class program. So we encourage faculty not to cancel class, rather have us come in. We do a 10-minute commercial for the Learning Commons, and then we actually focus on a particular presentation requested by the faculty. If it's something specialized, I write those myself and present those myself. Otherwise, the prefects are usually student workers that I've hired to do maybe 10 or 15 minutes on the bear claw, or study skills workshops where that takes a little bit longer. And I like to repurpose SI leaders who don't have a position. Subject area tutors, we have drop-in table models like many of you. It's, roll in, look scared, get help. The more scared you look, the faster you're going to get help. There's no crying in our bear claw, and we want to make sure that everyone's being supported. And then we have appointment-only tutors that get paid only when an appointment is made for a one-on-one consult. Now, in that case, those are usually specialty area classes where we don't need a large center that's open at this every time we're open. So that would exclude things like the math center and our chemistry, STEM material type centers. And then academic coaches. Right now, our academic coaches are currently grant funded through a different office, which is fantastic. So we haven't had to worry about those too much. That'll end in a couple of years. And then our reception and front desk workers, usually 6 to 8 people that we need to cover that area. So this is a lot of student employment. And if you're wondering, does he have any professionals in the space? I have a partner in the space who supervises the day-to-day activities of subject area tutors, the drop-in tables and the appointment-only tutors. And then together we make sure the space doesn't burn down. We have a front desk reception secretary who's really acts as our department support. We're the only 3 adults in the space. And I say adults with hostile air quotes because our college students really do run this space. We use graduate assistants for leadership as well as specialty projects with faculty, but the rest, student workers. I don't know if you're in a situation like that, but at a school the size of Missouri State University, it's a little unwieldy sometimes and can be problematic for my time and work-life balance. But we'll talk about that as we start talking about finding the right students, securing them in the position, and ensuring that they have the subject knowledge that we need to make our center a success. So when we think about those centers, how many employees do we need? Well, how many employees do you need? You got to think about several factors when it comes to that. For supplemental instruction, I have no research on this whatsoever other than my budget constrained me. I have a graduate assistant who helps me with behind the scenes data collection. Here at Missouri State University, we're using Track Cloud to capture the attendance in our sessions. They scan a QR code, and then behind the scenes, the graduate assistant is making sure that the data collection is correct. Often our leaders out in the field make errors, and then we have problems tracking that information. But as a rule of thumb, when faculty request an SI leader for their class, I look at the size of enrollment, and for 1 out of every 100 students in the target class, I'll hire. So I'll give you an example. Our anatomy and physiology class has 300 students enrolled in it. That is the in-person version. And I'll hire 3 SI leaders to support that, or course mentors depending on their schedule. And I'll talk about that in a bit. When I have faculty with multiple sections, I try to find one for only the online section. So if it's an online section, they get 1 leader. I don't care how large it is. Attendance in our online has been poor. I have not had data come in that suggests that one person could not handle it through our course management systems. So right now, that's the way we run, regardless of the target course's attendance. We do 1 for every 100 students with multiple sections, regardless of the number of sections. So an example, our Math 101, our basic math class, enrolls 25 people per class. Faculty who are at that level tend to teach 4 sections. So I hire 1 leader to cover all 4 of those sections for that faculty member. Most of you who know SI know that faculty, it really is faculty driven in the way that you're handling those sessions. So having 1 leader makes a lot of sense. For the Writing Center, that one's more complicated. I try to have 3 consultants on shift working every hour that we're open. We are currently open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 10 to 3 on Fridays, and 3 to 7 on Sundays. We've done a variety of scheduling purposes. Sometimes we used to open 8 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. every day of the week. And as the Writing Center became co-opted into our Learning Commons, we found that students were coming to the Writing Center particularly for what they needed, not necessarily for study skills. So we were able to farm that out a little bit better, and it reduced the number of writing consultants I needed. I have a maximum of 5 consultants working during peak times. That's where our data collection is really important. I look at trends. When are students most likely to make appointments? Most of you know it's midterm, after the first test, the night before our papers due, these sorts of things. Right at finals week, everything gets crazy, but everything stops for us on our study day. So at Missouri State, the last week of classes is Monday through Thursday. Friday, all classes are closed. That's study day. And since we have all student workers, we are not open from study day through finals week, with the assumption that it's time for you to fly solo and jump out of the nest and you'll be okay. That's the way we handle the Writing Center, with 2 graduate assistants. Normally 1 graduate assistant helps me with the day-to-day supervision and job performance reviews. The other helps me with training and working with faculty. I receive about 80 faculty papers a year through our Writing Center, so it's important for us to have a faculty liaison. For our Presentation Center, it's our brand new center. We have 1 graduate assistant, and then I try to have 2 consultants working every hour listening to speeches. This is imperfect. If you look at how this is broken down, what does that tell you and how many I need? Well, for SI, I need somewhere close to 60 to 70 student workers every semester. For the Writing Center, about 36. For the Presentation Center, between 2 and 6, depending on the semester. Our fall semester tends to be heavier for the Presentation Center because we are focusing right now in our fledgling years only on our basic public speaking course. We also hire for the drop-in tutoring tables. We need 2 graduate assistants. We have 2 tutors working every hour at the drop-in tables, with a maximum of 4 tutors during peak times. Working every hour is really important that we break that up as much as we can. As we come out of COVID, we have found that we didn't need as many. But before this, we probably had double that number for our drop-in tables. I do believe that will change. as we start to settle into our new normal and faculty start deciding that they need to up the rigor, we have to kind of monitor that to see what our usage looks like and then hire students appropriately to cover the gaps so that we don't have a lot of students waiting and getting frustrated. We also have on-demand tutoring. We usually check the DFW rates for target classes. So we have a request box where students can come in and say, I'd like a tutor for this class, and you currently don't have that. We need to find someone for that. That was the way our center was set up. It does allow for direct communication with department heads and faculty, which really is a benefit for us, as I'll talk about a little later. And then for the absent professor program, we do presentations on demand. So I have to cultivate experienced employees to do this, but occasionally I do hire new. So this is kind of what we're looking at. So every semester in the Bear Claw Center for Learning and Writing at Missouri State University, we have about 120 student employees, roughly, that plummeted during COVID. And then as we've rebuilt, we've gotten back to our new normal, again at 120 employees, but I'll kind of explore that and the reasons why we add and when we add people here in a bit. So this is what we're looking at, and this is how I started thinking about this presentation for Engineerica today is, how do I hire? What do I do that's different? How am I targeting these areas? And more importantly, what in the world makes me think I can staff these things? So here's what I've tried in the past. Since I didn't really know what I was doing, my background, I have a BA in theater performance and an MA in theater. I was a professional actor for a decade, and near the end of my career, I did stand-up. Now, don't do that. Whatever you do in your life, don't do that. It was the worst job I ever had, and I decided to go back to graduate school, and I got a master's degree in theater performance and started working for businesses pushing their products. It was not exactly what I wanted to do, so I went back to graduate school, got an MA in creative writing, my MFA in creative nonfiction writing, and was promptly hired to be a faculty in reading. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never really hired employees before I had this job. It was pretty new to me. And after 5 years of being a professor, they moved me into the evil staff position where I had to now hire. I had to hire my front desk employee. I had to hire the graduate assistants. I had to hire every student worker I needed. And normally, early on, it was based on my budget because I was building a program. So as I started to get larger and add programs to the Learning Commons, I had to figure out strategic ways to make it work. Because in addition to my job as the Director of Student Learning Services and the journals that I'm an editor for, and the national organizations I join, and the committees I must do as an employee of the university, I also write on the side for a couple clients. So I really do have a lot going on at any given point. So I started with group interviews. That seemed most prudent to me. I'd advertise for the jobs any place that I could on campus, and I'd hold these group interviews on a Saturday where they would come in as a large group, and I'd start weeding them down from there so that by the end of the day, I kind of had my team assembled. It took me all day long. It was a lot of trouble. And then we had to do another Saturday where they actually did a paperwork palooza, where they all came in and did their hiring paperwork with HR, me begging them to send people over to help me with this. That was a problem. First, my work-life balance was really out of whack on that one, but I'll talk about that in a second too. The second, I started to try group interviews by unit. So I'd hold these for a few hours in the evening as I started to refine my technique. It took me 2 or 3 hours to start the group interviews and then weed it down to what I needed for the writing center or the presentation center or something. And I would do this week by week so that I'd start around midterm, and then by the 1st of May, I usually have my team in place for the next semester. And of course, you all know things will happen over the summer. Student decides not to come back, family issues, there's some problems, money is an issue, these sorts of things. They get another job. And so I would do some pivoting over the summer to kind of fill in any gaps that occurred. Then I tried small group interviews by discipline. So that instead of just by unit, the whole writing center, maybe I was looking for tech writers, or in the past program, instead of just the biomedical sciences and biology, I just focus on biomedical sciences or accounting or that something. And so I'd have a smaller group. I could do that in a couple hours and get a discipline done each week. But as my SI program started to explode, that became problematic to get employees done in time. All of my group interviews included proficiency tests or short presentations. That was problematic as well. The proficiency tests, somebody had to grade them, somebody had to look at them. So I leaned heavily on my faculty partners and support to look at these proficiency tests, to even administer some of them. Short presentations to be heard by the comm faculty, for instance. Reading essays submitted for the Writing Center. These were all really problematic for me in the long run because I had to build that team. And I apologize for continuing to cough. I'm trying to mute it whenever it happens, but I have really bad allergies and I'm in Missouri. My car isn't red anymore, it's yellow from pollen. Moving on. All of these things seem to work in theory, but when it came down to it, my results were mixed. I had a lot of people apply who just really weren't qualified for the jobs, and they would show up and get weeded out early. Well, that was time consuming. They didn't read the job descriptions, or they were invited by my graduate assistant. She didn't double check their GPAs. These sorts of things were starting to add up as our team got larger and larger. Because you'll remember what I said earlier about just getting an empty room. My first semester, I had 6 student workers. That was it. So as it expanded, I had to figure out ways to be strategic with my time. And the university wasn't about to give me another full-time person or even a 3/4 person to assist me with this. The time-consuming part really did weigh on me. I started to think a lot of the things that I need to do to develop my center and really cultivate the right team dependent on communication early. So that's what I started to explore as I started thinking about how frustrating it was to do this job at that point. And many of you are probably in your offices having your sandwich and shaking your heads up and down that, yeah, hiring is one of the most challenging things we did. So first, we had to think about, of course, our budget-driven decisions. That drives a lot of what we do. And unfortunately, it is the way of the land anymore. I like to think of us not as a business, but in a lot of ways, we have to function like one. I have my own marketing. I have my own development of a website. I've got my own budget that stands alone. So you can only hire what you can afford. We all know that. That's in the category of duh. So I'm going to move on that. For a supplemental instruction model, again, we had a past leader at 10 hours a week and a course mentor at 5 hours a week. And you're probably wondering what's the difference. The past leader was embedded. So I was paying that person to attend the class daily. For the course mentor, they're not embedded. So I was able to save some money in that way as the program expanded. Experienced leaders who had seen the class over and over and over again moved to the course mentoring model. And during COVID, it was really helpful because then we were only online anyway, and it was all asynchronous at that point. So that really helped me save money in the short term. In the long term, what's happened is that some faculty prefer not to have the leader embedded, rather have that person as a TA on their course management system. But what that caused was an after effect that I had to work with faculty specifically to ensure that the marketing piece and that the communication with their student leader was strong. I'll talk about that in a bit too. For the writing fellows, I was able to repurpose a lot of my graduate assistants, and then I used senior consultants who have been with me for a couple years. We don't hire writing center consultants until they're juniors or seniors or grad students. So I was able to do that. And then the reception and front desk, as my budget was really crushed with the rapid growth of our center, I leaned heavily on our work study students. And work study now makes up all of the people who work at the front desk and other positions such as we had study skills mentors and academic coaches and specialty area things where work study was ideal for this. And so we learned heavily to work with the work study office to kind of get ahead of marketing on that. But you can't forget in your budget to leave room for all the things that go with hiring your students: orientation, ongoing training, award ceremonies for your tutors, guest speakers, office supplies, software and textbooks. So I started to look at ways I could share the costs. And part of this also drove the way that I hired. Grants for student success really helped a lot and account for how we work with a lot of our academic units. If many of them are writing grants for student success, I try to partner with them and actually do the training and assist them with finding the appropriate student workers for this. There are other departments with centers. Many universities will tell you that their center is fairly successful. However, for some reason, all of a sudden, a small success center has popped up in the business program or over in chemistry or something. And basically what I was discovering was that, well, they were specialty classes. And so what I did was help support those until they became absorbed into our center. So eventually all tutoring flows back to our Bear Claw Center for Learning and Writing. That is strategic. That also assists me with hiring. And then the last one on that list, sharing the cost, SGA, the Student Government Association. Never discount the power that your SGA has on your campus. And I'll give you a really quick example. At one point in our history, we had to cut some of our budget. That is always detrimental because I spend almost every dollar we have on student wages. When they said cut, I had to go to the departments and beg for help. The one we went to quickly was the chemistry program. Chemistry was the one that was on our chopping block because I try to protect math and writing, and everything else is kind of up for grabs. And in this case, chemistry really is so specialized in some areas that I felt their graduate assistants would be better for this. And so I started working with SGA, and what they did for me in the short term as I started negotiations was actually fund student workers for me to man the table for 2 semesters. And then we were able to leverage that information with the department to give us graduate assistants on loan, who then have their office hours in our space and become tutors for us. So that's been really a major boon to helping me with that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So how do I hire? The job interview, as you know, is performative and theatrical. At our level, when you're hired as a director, you're usually invited to campus for this day-long event where you're in meeting after meeting and presentation after presentation. You're trying to sell yourself as much as the school is trying to sell you. And you know what? I think that's right. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing with our student workers. So I have 3 main tenets that I use when I started restructuring the way I hired. I wanted to be creative. All my degrees were creative degrees. My son is a chemist, calls my degrees group hug, touchy-feely stuff. He's not wrong, right? And I wanted our interviews to be a little bit more creative. I wanted to challenge the person who interviewed. Is this the right job for them? We've all made hiring mistakes. Every one of us has a story in here where you've had to fire someone. In my 23 years of hiring people for our Learning Commons, I've only fired 2 employees after I changed my hiring model. Before that, it was maybe 1 or 2 a year. What changed was because I challenged them in a different way. And then using my current team to help me with the hiring process, which I'm sure many of you do already. So let me break that down a little bit. So finding the student employees became paramount for me. Where am I going to get them? I started with faculty and staff, and here's why I did that. Faculty are your first line of defense for study skills anyway in the most challenging classes on your campus. So why not lean on them to help you find the right people? Staff are also teaching staff. They know the right people too. Many of those staff work with student organizations that are connected to majors that you need in your center. So I started workshops with faculty and staff about the care and feeding of their embedded tutors or TAs or anything that I could think of to help them figure out how the center worked and what we really needed. And I still do those workshops to this day. Current student employees are great references. Hey man, we're hiring 8 people to replace graduating seniors. How many of you know someone in your classes that would make a good writing consultant? Send me their names. Direct appeals. And my direct appeals are in all these areas. When I determine how many I need for each semester, I visit TRIO, the multicultural student centers on campus. There are several, the LGBTQIA center being another. Every fraternity and sorority who will let me in, the Student Government Association, our honors college meetings, and the graduate college, because many of our graduate students don't have assistantships. As a matter of fact, at Missouri State University, only 13% of our graduate students have a graduate assistantship. I was shocked to learn that number. Many of them are looking for a job that's flexible. So I lean heavily on our graduate college for this. When I say a direct appeal, that means me getting on the schedule in a meeting with a bunch of constituents in a room and saying, this is what I'm looking for, send me names. In addition to things like the Multicultural Student Center, I go during their peak hours and hand out applications to students who are sitting there working and ask them personally to apply. I go to student research symposiums on campus. Those are great venues to find out what kind of work is being done in certain areas, what their presentation skills are like, and more how they think and how they respond to tough questions. I advertise successes and internal awards. That has actually brought a lot of people to say, hey, I'd like to learn more about that. What kind of successes and internal awards am I talking about? If our students end up getting a position in the graduate college when they graduate, or they move on to great jobs and tutoring became part of what they do. Internal awards, faculty vote on the best SI leader for the semester, for instance. We give awards for them. I advertise these everywhere, especially where students are. Department newsletters, we try to get in every one of them during the hiring process. It seems like every department has one anymore. Parent and family programs, I get them before they even get here. I talk about the job. I talk about the rewards of the job and what it means afterwards to be able to say, I taught others how to do chemistry. I taught others how to work in their introduction to biomedical science course. This teaching is really beneficial for them later on to say, I have real world experience working with employees. So I want them thinking about jobs before they even commit to registration. And then I hit them at SOAR. Tell them we're the biggest student employer on campus and we hit them hard. That's a lot of work. And you guys are thinking, when does this guy sleep? Well, I have built this in such a way to where I know the rhythm of the semester well enough that I can program a lot of this in advance. I have 3 or 4 versions for the parent and family newsletters, the department newsletters, for instance, that I can rotate, that I'm tweaking each semester. But for the most part, they're written, done, and I have a communication strategy to ensure that those students are getting it when I need it the most. For the rest of them, especially the direct appeals, I'm kind of stuck and at the mercy of those departments to let me in when I can. When I started the Writing Center early on, the first thing I did was I put on a suit and tie, I ordered a bunch of swag, and I went to every department meeting that would let me in, and I gave out swag, and I said, what can the Learning Center, specifically the Writing Center, do for you that you need? And they would always say, do you mean our students? I say, no, faculty, I mean you. What do you need from me? And what that did was it started to build a trust with the faculty that, yes, we could support everyone on our campus. And once some of them, for instance, would send me articles and I would work with them one day and then pawn it off on the appropriate graduate assistant the next, they started to see the value in the way that we ran our center, in the way that these sessions run. They started to recognize we weren't just a homework mill, rather we were their academic partners. And they are, again, our first line of defense. So that's why I put faculty and staff at the top, because that drove what happens next. So normally, many of you probably do this. You do some kind of advertising on your campus. You're probably sending it to the student newspaper. Maybe you're sending this email, general email blast to a department, or maybe you're advertising in some of the ways that I've mentioned before by going to these groups. and saying, hey, I need some help. My SI program ran an ad, and it yielded 76 applications for 55 positions. That wasn't near enough, and only 4 were qualified who answered that ad, and we didn't hire anyone from that group. We placed ads on our student employment website and on the campus newspaper, and that cost us, and only 2 applicants scheduled appointments, and neither was hired. This was the frustration part early on in my academic career working with these programs. So now what I do is an invitation letter. Faculty send me their request for SI or the English department, where I divide it into several areas. I need tech writers, I need creative writers, I also need public speakers, I also need those who are adept at working with outlines for public speaking. I need tech writers that also can handle faculty papers. So what I do is I divide these into categories, and I email my constituents, our faculty and staff, or our student leaders on campus, and I say, send me the names of your best students. There was no cost, it's just sweat equity. My SI program, to give you a really quick example, we were down to 5 classes during COVID, to 55 this fall. So within a 2-year period, I had 55 classes. That's not counting the sections, just the classes that we supported. And invitations were sent to over 200 students, and we yielded 75% of them responded and scheduled an appointment made. The Writing and Presentation Center needed only 8 replacements that same semester, and we sent to 40 students and had 31 scheduled appointments. That seems like a really much better return on my investment. This was just the direct appeal to a student. And I'm going to admit, guys, it's really ego-driven, because the letter we send basically says you were named by a faculty member in your department as an excellent student, and we need your help. And I played to that. So this is a year-round endeavor for me. When I think of working with faculty and staff, I mean it takes me all year to do this. And it's just a little bit of time each week, but it works. So the email to drive our numbers for student employees. And then I require every student employee, before they meet with me, to have a reference form on file from 2 different faculty who could talk to their ability about the subject matter, their writing ability, their public speaking ability, their ability in their biomedical science classes, these sorts of things. The GPA requirement we used to say, if you work in the writing center, I want a 3.5 and above. That was too generic. Then we dropped it to 3.25 because we've recognized that, well, good skill doesn't necessarily translate into excellent GPAs. Now what I was looking for was, I dropped most of that, and I said, you know what I want instead? I want faculty in these classes to tell me this student knows the material. That changed the game for us, because then I didn't have to administer proficiency tests unless I was on a case-by-case basis. Rather, what I did was lean heavily on faculty to inform that this was working for them. I also had a formal application that required lengthy answers from the student worker, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Networking then becomes key. I do spend a lot of time in our faculty lounge here on campus having lunch with constituents. It's great. I get to have a lunch with them. I get to learn about what their problems are in their classes. And I'm able then to say, hey, do you have students you like to work with in your class? The ones who answer the rhetorical questions, the one who seems to draw people to others, those who I want. And then I also work with a lot of student organizations. It helped that I was a sorority advisor for a decade. So I kind of understood the rhythm and flow of that. And if you don't do that currently, I do recommend that you try to network through student organizations by being an advisor for one or more. It really doesn't take that much time depending on your role. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse on that and move to the next thing. So what's it look like? Our faculty and staff reference form, what I'll do is in the email inviting the student worker to apply, I also send them a formal application and this recommendation form. And I ask them to send it directly to their faculty and have a conversation. Now, faculty know it's coming. because when they send me the names, I tell them that this is what it looks like, expect to have this. So everyone knows it's coming. So these students then hit up their faculty, but I don't want them to hit up just the one who recommended them. I want them to hit up somebody else as well. And let them get creative on this. Maybe it is the president of your student organization. Maybe it's your academic advisor if you don't have one in the department. Fine. Maybe for transfer students, it's a faculty member who's not here on this campus right now. And so that becomes a different conversation. And I usually reach out to those faculty when I see it, the form come through, and make sure that they're clear on that. What it did for me was having these on file before I invited them to see me was that it got a lot of the preliminary stuff out of the way. Faculty who have worked with me for a while already know what the program is like. New faculty are required to meet with me, usually during one of my workshops before the semester begins, to understand what I'm looking for. Remember this, is that as somebody who's hiring for all of these areas, you're not a subject expert in those areas sometimes. So I trust my faculty to do that. Has that burned me before? Not yet. Again, faculty are on your schedule, and sometimes it takes a while to get these forms in. So I try to give them plenty of lead time before the hiring process begins. I'll give you an example for some of our application questions, and many of you probably have seen similar ones for pretty much everything, but for our SI leaders, what do you really need to know about them? What do you want to know? What's their attitude toward the job? And so I'm really mindful on how I thought about that. So on this list, you'll see on the screen, I asked them first, how would you describe the role of a tutor? You and I both know that if you work with supplemental instruction, they're overqualified to be a tutor at this point. Their training is much more intensive. It is ongoing. It is constant feedback loop with their faculty. It becomes very different model. But I wanted to see what they thought basically of student support in general. Then I asked if they participate in other experiences relevant to the responsibility. And I get what you would expect here. Many of them say they were A+ students in high school who had to tutor on lower grades, or they're the kid in the dorm everybody turns to check their APA style. You get the idea. Those two were warm-ups for me. I'm trained as a writing professor. I wanted them to get warmed up before they got hit with their definition of academic success. And this is the big one for me. I will screen these students and not call them for an interview based on this answer. What am I looking for? Well, in a lot of cases, faculty are sending me their students who are the best and the brightest. And in the Honors College, I'm getting these 4.0 students who've never known a struggle in their lives. How are they defining academic success? If they say some version of it's an A, I do not call them for an interview. And I know some of you guys are like, wait a minute, isn't that eliminating your best based on what they know about the material, your best and brightest? No, I need someone who understands the struggle. You can't tell me, almost everyone here in this room has had that class, and you know the one that beats you up and makes you work harder than you ever have. Mine was math, I'm not gonna lie. First grade, Mrs. Tice, she was 1,000 years old. One day she pointed a long bony finger at me during board races, and she called me stupid and told me to sit down. And I cried at my desk. 50 years later, when I do the budget for the Bear Claw, I think about Mrs. Tice's cold, dead hand, and she still haunts me today. But you know what? It taught me one really valuable thing. Things just didn't always come easy. In college, I had public speaking for the first time. I was a hot mess that first time. I was terrified. First time I ever had to do a foreign language. I was so bad, I had to take 3 different ones just to get to 2 classes I needed for the BA. And understanding that academic struggle for the students was key. What I'm looking for is some value of understanding the material. B, maybe the best you're able to achieve in that class. Does it make them good enough to tutor? Absolutely. What advice would you give to another student how they could be more successful in the classroom? And this is a wide variety of answers because I want to see what kind of study skills techniques my applicant is using. Many of them, and you guys know this, if you polled your student body and say, how do you study? They're going to say something like, I look at stuff a lot. What I want is some version of do stuff, get on your feet, move around, change the dynamic. It shouldn't be just stare at material. It should be do stuff to help you remember the material long term. And then the primary goal of the past leader is to foster independent learning. I wrote on that. And I put those in hostile air quotes there. And I said, how would they do that? Well, many of them maybe don't know the definition of the word foster, and they don't recognize how much it means to help. And so what I'm trying to get them to do is say, think outside the box. What do you do with this? And I get a wide variety of answers, but I always affirm that answer with them because it does help me build training later. And then I ask if they've attended a session before because it's really important that they know some of our models. And if they don't, that's okay, I can train them, but I want to see in the interview where things happen. And so it's very similar in the writing center as well, except I also ask them to attach 2 papers. I do review those papers, but I'm only looking for things that I can talk about in the interview, not holistically at this point. Faculty have recommended this person, he or she's a good writer. In many cases, they've already been published. I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is integration of sources. What citation methods are you using? How are you structuring this paper? I want to be able to talk about something about the writing process during the interview. Okay, that's a lot of unpacking of that. But before you even get started, you got to figure out what your office looks like. What's yours look like? Is it conducive to interviewing a student? Can students see inside, even with the door shut? Is your office formal or not? Where are they going to sit during the interview? Is there room for them to take notes? In some cases, do you need someone to monitor the interview? And if so, can they? Do you have room in your office? Is your phone shut off? How about your cell phone? Is it shut off? Are your emails pinging or muted? Here's the thing, now wait a minute, what's he talking about? So let me show you what mine looks like a little bit. So I actually did think about this because early on in my academic career as a faculty member, my first office was a closet in the basement and it was paneled. It was dark. And I think crickets lived there. It was not conducive. It looked like a serial killer shack. And I don't understand how a student would want to walk in there in the first place, right? So most of the time I was meeting students, especially when I started hiring, at the student union because it was more conducive, but it wasn't great for conversation. Plus it felt too informal. I wanted something to break that up a little bit. So here's my current office. When you're standing in the Learning Center and looking in, that's what you see. And everything is purposeful. There's my desk. If you look at my desk, you can see that it's got this big riser for me to stand up. It's got the computer monitor, which is huge. And I've got this one portion right off to the side where the student can sit and take notes. It's not great, but it's better than my closet from before. This is actually a former group study room in the library repurposed as my office. But if you start looking around my office, you probably notice something pretty important, especially since today is May the 4th be with you, right? But here's my formal stuff, all the awards and things I've done, the obligatory things you're supposed to post in your office because reasons. I don't have my degrees up there, but it's just because they were expensive to frame and I'm cheap. But you might have noticed on these side pieces, lots of pictures and stuff. These are framed autographed photos of people I met. I write for a comic book company on the side. You also notice that there's a big Darth Vader in the corner and there was a Star Wars poster behind me. What these did was actually cause students to relax. My first office didn't have all this stuff in there. It was very utilitarian. It was all the stuff I needed to teach. Now they walk in and they see this. And you'd be surprised how many of them ask questions about the signed pictures or the poster on the wall or comment how much they felt comfortable in the office. You may have also noticed, some of you who are sharper than others on watching the video of me talking, my lights went off halfway through. And that's because somebody put a sensor on my office, and when I don't stand up and wave my hands, the sensor shuts off because the computer blocks it. When a student's in here, it doesn't do that. But when they come to the office door, sometimes it's already dark, and it causes an interesting dynamic. My goal was comfort level and a little bit of distance. So, this is what they're seeing when they look at me. When you close the door, privacy is implied and it's amplified. It can be stressful for your employee. It can be threatening to some, and it can be distracting. Just the act of closing that door is like this formality that really can cause some students to change the way they respond to you. I still do it, but I'll show you how I do it here in a second. You need to have a balance between professional and student friendly here. I am limiting the amount of people I see now based on what I was doing before with these giant group interviews. So I don't want to waste my time. I want to interview the student that I need. And before she comes in and sits down, I'm already half in the bag for her. Can she get me over the finish line? Now, I will admit my office can be a little bit distracting from some students, especially with students with disabilities, and a lot of them get distracted staring at the pictures and that sort of thing. And that's okay. I let them wander around. I even let them pick up any of these things that I have in here. All those pops were given to me by my children. So they're in here. So most of your students have had a off-campus job before. They probably worked in high school, and they already know what questions most interviewers are going to ask. They're going to say, what's your natural strength? What kind of animal would you be? What's your favorite color? What qualities of your parents do you like the most? What's your leadership style? Or how would you handle blank situation that you randomly pulled out? Or maybe you pulled out because you've had it happen in your center before. Is that going to help you learn about how the student's going to tutor? Is that going to teach you the friendliness? Is that going to break down the barrier that's caused when you shut that door and you formally have invited this person to sit down because someone on campus saw potential in them? You're already heavily weighted with that. What is the formality going to teach you? We've got to find ways to break that barrier. So I told you, before we even begin, the creativity starts for me. So it begins when they enter the learning center. Did that person check in at the front desk or go straight to your office? I get about 50-50 on that. Our learning center, like many of yours, is a giant open space with a formal front desk that students often bypass to go to the bathroom. And they often bypass it because all they're doing is meeting friends to study at some of our really pretty study areas. So many of them are so accustomed to skipping the front desk and check in that they come back. But I do try to have our front desk capture them and have them sit and wait. If they bypass them, I kind of lose some information. How did the person treat you? How did the person greet you? Was the person friendly? Were you able to have them sit down and then message me to let me know they were here? How are they dressed? I actually want to know what they're wearing when they come in. I'd like to see students dressed up. Yeah, in our center, students are dressing like a student and they're acting like a student. And the only dress requirement I have is that you don't make my grandma blush. But I certainly want them to feel like this is a professional job, because the more professional they feel like it is at the beginning, the easier it is for me to keep control of them once they're out in the field and I'm not seeing everything at once. When they come into your office, how do they act? Do they sit down immediately, or do they wait for you to invite them to sit down? And then how do they feel about shutting the door? Here's what I do. I make them wait. They check in at the front desk and they're early. They're not seeing me till exactly on time. And if they're just a few minutes before, sometimes I'll make them wait a few minutes later. And then I have them walk back and I pretend I don't know why they're there. Now, I know that sounds silly. You're like, wait a minute, didn't you formally set this? Of course I did. But what I'm doing isn't being rude. What I'm saying rather is I take their applications. I'm like, what was your name again? Oh, okay. And I make them stand there to see what they're going to do. I know who they are. I may even have their application on top. What I'm wanting to do is see their body language in an odd situation. Are they thrown off by that? Do they wait to sit down, or do they just do it? I prefer them to wait, because what that shows me is that they understand that there's a control dynamic that needs to happen, and I want them to follow the same type of pattern when they work with their students. I ask for permission to shut the door. I'll do that no matter what. So once I've established who they are, where they are, I invite them to sit, tell them to take off their backpack or whatever and relax. Sometimes I offer them coffee or tea if I have it brewing, which I usually do. I also say, do you mind if I shut the door? The goal is to throw the interviewee a little bit off balance. And the reason I want to do that is that not all of your sessions are the same. And really, to be frank, a lot of the videos that we use behind the scenes to help train our students are like the perfect world. And you and I both know that that's not going to happen in the perfect setting. And most of our training is also, this is the perfect thing. The student asks these questions, you respond in this way, you redirect in this. That never happens. It also tells your student how to handle stress. In the Writing Center, we're always attending to body language to see how that's going. I'm doing the same thing here. I want to see how that works. Do I have a presentation center person who shakes when she gets nervous? Does she get flushed and her neck turn bright red? These are things I'd like to know. I'd like to know how this person's reacting to a stressful situation so that she can aid that student when that stress comes up as well. So this is the intangible thing faculty can't tell me. So the required stuff for the interview, and that's pretty much the required things. Any GPA requirements, training dates, I already know that in advance, so I want to know their conflicts, if any. If they're an international student, have they started the paperwork for hiring? Do they have a social security number? Are there any issues with their hiring that I need to know? And then I ask students what they know about the role to get them warmed up. You will start to get a sense for that student as they talk to you, because I always give them time to ask questions, and I love long, awkward pauses. That tells me more about the student during the interview than you might realize. Learn to enjoy it, folks. Relish those awkward moments. It tells you a lot about how they'll handle silence in SI sessions, in writing consultations, in tutoring, etc. So now I throw them curveballs. Depends on the student too. Sometimes you can engage a student right away, and sometimes it takes a little bit. And I think both students are fine. I've had shy students who can stand up and do presentations like nobody. I've had really gregarious people do horrible jobs. How can you tell from this? So if they're really not asking a lot of questions, I'm like, you know what, leave your stuff here, come on, let's take a tour. And I just start walking them around the center, and their interview becomes, how are they responding to the people I introduced them to? Are they treating them with respect? Do they look people in the eye? Do they ask relevant questions to the student workers? Because these are their new friends. Let them or force them to deviate from the interview. What I want to do is I want to know if this student can have a conversation about anything else besides the job sitting in front of me. How prepped is she to understand what a writing consultant does, or what an SI leader might do from the faculty member? What can I do to get the student to talk to me about anything else? And so I'll use the application's long answers, say, hey, I noticed that you were an A+ tutor. What made you tutor in the first place? How come you came here to Missouri State instead of a junior college? Or when they point out something in my room, we start talking about Star Wars and see how far they go. And I know you're thinking, now, wait a minute, aren't you getting them off the interview? Look, I need to know what kind of person I'm dealing with. But here's what I do during the interview. I interrupt or cut them off occasionally on purpose. I want to know how they handle it. Do they stop? Do they finish it later? Do they get frustrated? Repeating information. Because I've already pretended a little bit, maybe I don't know who they are. And then we talked about SI a little bit, and I took on them on a tour, and I came in and sat back down. I'm like, okay, so then I repeat what SI is again. How does she respond? Sometimes if they're doing pretty good at that point, I'll call them by a different name and see if they correct me. I also write on the application a lot. Sometimes I write notes to myself, but for the most part, I already know who they are and what I know because I've already researched them before they came in. But writing on the application is a powerful moment because then they start to wonder what you're writing. I want to see how they respond. My goal is to engage them in a conversation, not just about the job, okay? I need to see more. So for the interview, I only interview one person at a time. Oh, excuse me. Only interview one person at a time, and I usually reserve 20 to 30 minutes for each interview. So I need to get to it quickly. Now, say, for instance, you've got a new class for your SI. It's accounting. We have an accounting class for tax accounting, and I only had one applicant. The faculty member sent me 3 names instead of 10. I have one person who applied. He's dynamite. What do? I don't tell him that you're the only person here and this is a formality and I'm going to hire you anyway. I always maintain that there's a competitiveness in the role, because I always say we don't hire anyone for the job, and I won't. I also tell faculty, don't send me names of people you won't work with, because if you do that and neither of us want that person, I'm not going to hire them. I also make sure that faculty approve any hires that for embedded tutoring. So if they say, hey, I don't mind working with these 3 people, I rank all 3 who attended the session, and then I pick one and say, help me. Most of you probably do that, but in the case of only one applicant, I do have to be upfront with the faculty member, but never with the applicant. I want the applicant to feel like he or she's won something. I just don't really talk about it in that part. Look, firing someone's awful, and I don't want to have that to do that. And ever tried to fire an SI leader? Once you fire an SI leader, you don't have support for that class. So you have to maintain this respect and work ethic for this person. Training is expensive. It costs a lot for the food that I bring in and all the copies that we need. And most important, it maintains a professional atmosphere. So these are some of the things that I think about even with one applicant. Now, I'm going to only deviate for a moment on this slide with the struggle with implicit bias, but I want to hire a diverse team too. Missouri State University has 26,000 students. Most of the students we serve in the Learning Center are most of the underserved groups that other groups just don't see as often as we do. So consider this as you start thinking about your process. Does your job description limit candidates? Are you talking to all possible constituents to get people who look like them, who understand them, to be in the space? Historically, underserved populations are the heart of our Learning Center, and I always want to make sure that I am addressing that need early on. Okay, so ending the interview. Like any tutoring session, you need a clear beginning, middle, and ending. So I have a closure technique, just like we train our SI leaders, right? Or our writing consultants. And I don't mean to just stand up and go, okay, we're done. Never ask, what questions do you have to end your session? Because at that point, if it hasn't emerged in conversation, it probably won't. And then the student is just spinning, looking for something that really is a waste of time at this point. Many of them don't have questions after they're hired. I always ask, have I scared you off yet? And a lot of them laugh. They go, no, no, no. I'm like, okay, I know this seemed unconventional to you or odd that we really never talked about the job, but let me tell you my timeline. Here's what's going on. And I tell them, usually give them about a week out. And I say, I'm going to say on May 4, you should hear from me. If you don't, you can always email me and say, what up? And I'll tell you, it's probably just a delay on our hiring end, or if my office door is open, you can walk in and ask questions. In fact, I encourage you to do that. I tell them how they'll hear it. They'll receive an email from me. It'll be copying the faculty member, and we'll also copy our my administrative assistant who will assist them with paperwork. I tell them that open door policy happens all the way up and through their employment. Sometimes I do the cards on the table technique, depending on the student. So you've got the student who's really not asking questions. She's not engaged me too much. So what I'll do instead is, and I really want to hire her, I'll say something like, here's what I did. None of these questions had to do with the job because I wanted to see how you responded. I was looking for body language. I was looking for how you treat people as we walked around. I was looking to see how you addressed me. So let's just drop all the pretense, okay? And sometimes you can just see them relax and the interview is still happening because I need to see how the student responds when I take the pressure off. And I'm always honest with them as much as I can. And I only use praise if I'm sincere. And I rarely, if ever, hire someone on the spot. You don't want to lead them on. Anything could change after that person walks out that door. After the interview, I talk to my team. During our weekly meetings, I say, who knows this person? What are your thoughts? Has this person come to SI? Did you work with them in the writing center? Did they drop in at the math table? What were your thoughts on how this person worked with you? I tell applicants, I'm going to send out 3 letters. The first one's thank you for applying. I never send that one. That's a dismissal. Never do it. Thank you for applying, but I couldn't fit you with the current team. Could you apply next year, next semester? That one's always the one I send to the person I did not hire. And the reason that I send that is I want to cultivate that student for the next semester. Maybe she wasn't ready for prime time yet. The third one's you're hired. And I follow that up after the student says, yes, I want the job. I send a separate email with training materials, dates for the training, and a sign-up sheet for the paperwork. So I've talked to you for a little bit over an hour. We've only got a few minutes remaining. Let's talk. What questions do you have for me or have popped up during this presentation that I can address? Rachel, did we get any questions during that?
We have one question. We had a question or two about accessing the PowerPoint. We are going to make that available. We'll send that out with the recording along with some other materials that Michael sent over. But in terms of questions about the presentation, so far we have one, but if anyone else wants to put those in to the questions box, please feel free. But this one says, my college pays tutors quite poorly at under $15 an hour. This makes it hard to attract good candidates. What suggestions, if any, do you have to help with this problem? And she asks if there are any strategies particularly that have worked with administration to improve pay situations.
Our pay is awful too. I know that they can make more money at Burger King. I know that when they work for me, they won't smell like a French fry when they're done either. That's a challenge, and it has not changed here at Missouri State either. Missouri has enacted a yearly raise for everyone at minimum wage that will max out in the next 2 years at $15 an hour. And what that caused was some compression for us, because then I was able to hire less people, because every January the thing was going up $1, and I was having a problem with keeping people, or at the beginning. When I shifted my tactics to having faculty help me recruit, pay didn't seem to come up as much. And the reason that it didn't come up as much is because of the way that we approached it through the letters we sent. When I said, we're inviting you to apply, this is not for everyone. I don't advertise these jobs. If I don't find the right person, I'm not going to hire for this role. Faculty want you. That was a powerful game changer for us. It did change the way that students applied. I will tell you that. It drove them down a little bit, but what it did was get me more quality in my applications and more diversity in the applications. The second part was I was always upfront about that. I would tell them the starting pay was minimum wage. Right now in Missouri, it's $12 an hour. I tell them that every semester I give them a raise, nominal. You're not going to retire on that. Now, for people like in the SI program, the course mentor model at 5 hours a week suddenly became doable for them, because they were getting, okay, maybe only $60 a week minus taxes, but it was a tank of gas home, it was another textbook, cheap one, lunch. You get the idea. What it did was say, well, I can manage that. I can fit that in. And then for the writing center or the drop-in tables and that sort of thing, the way we were attracting them was really saying, this is a resume builder. And by advertising the successes of our graduates, change that too. Students were saying, wow, I can put that on a resume, and that's so much better than working at Walmart. I could say that I help tutors, and we have internal promotions that may not necessarily translate into money, but does give them something different on their resume. And I'll give you an example of that. I do not use certification for our tutors, because I felt like if we were going to do that and I had to pay for that, I was taking away from potential raises. I was getting everybody in different tracks, and that became problematic for me. I wanted to have people who naturally rise to the surface in these sessions to get more responsibility, so they could come to training over and over again and get paid for that. They could help me with that. They become, they get trainer on their job description suddenly. My graduate assistants, suddenly I was saying that you were an assistant director because I didn't have any professionals. Why not them? And that changed the way they applied. Students in the Writing Center who became writing fellows was more concentrated work with faculty, suddenly became a boost for them to get into graduate colleges because now they were getting letters of reference from faculty they'd work with who said, this person helped me create this. It was a powerful model that to this day, I have not, and I'm gonna knock on wood hard because that's a fantastic question. I have not had complaints about their pay. And I don't believe from the polls we've done that we've had anyone say they're not going to apply because of that. Now, have I lost people to other gigs? Yes, but only at the end of the semester. Most of them have been loyal enough to stick it out. And I lose a lot of my chemistry people really fast that way because my son is a chemist. I told you he was our first pass leader for chemistry. Now he has his own lab at 3M, right? But then I could not keep up with the wages that the city was going to pay him to test water samples. But he and other folks like him have stuck it out through the semester, made it work, and then they embraced the other model so that I didn't have to lose people midstream. It is extremely rare that we do. Good question.
Okay, and we've had a number of questions come in while you were answering that, and I know the end of the presentation is 2:15. If you're able to stay and answer, anybody who wants to stay is welcome to, and of course we'll send out the recording for anybody who does have to drop off. So our next question is, at my institution, we have the hardest time finding or hiring STEM tutors. Any tips and tricks?
The STEM tutors are my bread and butter, and I get many applicants, and most of this presentation was probably trying to lean into some of those tips and tricks. Again, faculty became paramount for me, but also I found some evidence that we were getting a lot of referrals from the lab courses taught by TAs. Typically, our tutoring doesn't support a lab course. We don't talk about the labs. We're not dealing with it in that way because we have the assumption that the TAs are handling that in more of a small group or one-on-one basis for us. However, by assisting departments in training TAs and GAs, I have been able to cultivate more of that. Even better, I'll give you a really good example of that. Our occupational therapy program, it's a graduate level course. We needed someone for that class because they were perceiving that the students in that major were terrified to talk to their faculty because they were all in competition with each other for jobs later, which I thought was a fascinating way that they were doing something in their orientation. So now what I've done is not only been able to join in on their orientations and talk about the jobs, we hire two of their own to help students in the cohort help each other. And so I asked them to start thinking about the best students in their classes. Faculty send me those names, we hire them and then put them back in the program as a pass leader. And that's really helped drive our STEM because now I can say to department heads and faculty, we're supporting graduate level courses with our tutoring. Surely you can help me find somebody in BMS 100. And it works every time. Every time that they've had a satellite campus, satellite tutoring center set up somewhere on campus, I find out what's happening. I go to the faculty in charge of that and say, do you want some help with training? Do you want tips and tricks? Would you like my handouts? I give them that. I teach a capstone course in honors college. I'm able to cultivate students from there. So you start to get the idea that what I'm doing is something more comprehensive. And most of it is faculty driven to drive our STEM majors. I know that may sound like a lot, but by leveraging them, what I've been able to do was get the faculty to help me in ways that they didn't used to. It really became important when we did the course mentoring, the cheaper model with 5 hours a week, because then I needed faculty to do the advertising for me. So what I did was write a comprehensive communication plan that helped my faculty communicate with students when they had embedded tutors. And what that did was also make students curious enough to find out about the job. And so as time went on, it's really become a lot less work for me to find STEM tutors.
All right. And then we have another question, and I had a follow-up privately to clarify. She asks, how do you handle when you initially email someone about the job and you never hear back? Do you assume if they don't bother to answer the email, you don't want to hire them anyway? Or do you give them the benefit of the doubt and reach out again or call? And I wanted to know before I brought this question to you, if we were talking about by initial email, we were talking about an initial reach out or a job offer. And she did clarify an initial reach out when the professor has recommended them, and I'm at a community college. It's slim pickings, so I don't just want to dismiss them because I'm not responding to my email, which I feel.
Oh, I tried to one time, and I feel this one like down to my core. I one time tried to figure out how many emails the university was sending out just to a student on a daily basis, and no one could tell me. There was no comprehensive plan anywhere. Students were getting them from registration, they were getting from enrollment services, they were getting them from faculty, from each other, from student organizations, from constituents, and they were deleting half of them. So what I did, the first email, and maybe I should have clarified that first email that goes out, it's always individual to that student, and I give them a deadline to apply. The day before the deadline, if they haven't applied, I send a reminder, say, hey, maybe you didn't see this, and it's very different. It copies the same email, but above that, I'm like, hey, maybe you didn't see this. I know we're bombarding you, and I put high importance on it. But this faculty member was really interested in working with you, and I leave it at that. If I don't hear anything after that, and the deadline has passed, I give it a couple days, and I send one final one. I put final notice, and I go, maybe you've been thinking about it. I'd really be curious to hear from you. Now, in this case, there are some students who always respond to that third one and say, I wasn't really interested in the first place. Thank you for reaching out though. I've never had anyone say, take me off your distribution list. This is horrible. I'm tired of this. What I get was usually I needed the 3 nudges. But what if no one responds? What if accounting 201 sends me 20 names and nobody wants the job because it's an egregious class and they don't want to do it? I reach back out to faculty and guess what? Your first batch didn't work out. Send me more. And they always have more. And that's been really helpful to me too. And then I tell faculty on that second email, we're running out of time because once they leave for summer, I can't get hold of them. So what I need you to do is to talk to individuals you're interested in working with to get them to respond to me. And that does the trick. So those are my tips and tricks for that. Now, after hiring, I do make them, and this is kind of a follow-up to what Rachel's clarification question was. After hiring, I give them a deadline to respond. And if they don't respond to that, it says in the email, I will move to the next name on the list. So in that email that I sent to folks that says, hi, we're not hiring you, I don't really send that until after I've got everyone secured. So occasionally I've had to reach out to my maybe next semester people and say, hey, guess what? This person was unable to do it. And I know you're so interested and I really enjoyed talking to you. Would you mind? And I always get a response, always.
All right. Awesome. And next question is, perhaps the person asked, perhaps you mentioned this earlier, but what percentage of the faculty recommendations eventually get hired as subject tutors?
Oh, I don't know if I ever broke that down by percentage for subject area tutoring, but I would say it's rather high, probably 75% of them. And let me think about this next semester. I would say that that's true. About 3/4 of them that actually respond, come in for the interview and sit through the interview and we feel comfortable with are getting job offers. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty high. And this next question,
It didn't used to be that way.
I was really excited to get to because this next question is one that was a big thing for me when I was running a learning center. Tutors and SI leaders are high achieving and often overly committed leaders on campus. How do
Yep.
you sell the position to tutors or SI leaders, especially if they say they don't have time?
Every time they say that. And you're right, we tend to hire high achieving students who are stretched thin everywhere. And so the first thing I tell them is I look at their transcript before they ever come in, and then I look at their application. They're telling me about all these things that they're doing. And if it's somebody like that who's really overcommitted, I'm saying, are you sure you have time to do this? And many of them will tell you yes, right? Those who tell you no, I'm curious as to why they would have applied in the first place. But I also tell them that it's an extremely flexible gig, and it is, right? Yes, you're probably sending a survey out to all the students in the target class. The survey says something like, when would you likely attend? And then you're looking at your past leader or your SI leader saying, and when can you actually hold the sessions, and hope that you get close. Well, what we did here was flip that a little bit. Once this started to really roll for me, that became problematic to finding the classroom space I needed, because at Missouri State, I had to request it every semester. So here's what I did instead. During training, I ask all of the SI leaders to tell me when they can hold their office hours and when they can hold their sessions. Then we find the classroom space, and then we wait for a couple weeks, and we find out who's coming and who's not. And if it looks like that we need to move that around, the student now has had time to adjust, and we start looking at tweaking that schedule a little bit. And you would be shocked to learn that only maybe a handful of classes are ever shuffled based on that schedule. You and I both know you're not going to reach everyone in the target class, and likely many of the students you need to reach aren't going to come anyway. But by holding office hours, that was able to make that work a little bit better. And I allowed the leaders to hold them over Zoom, the office hours, not their sessions. I like them in person because on their feet doing stuff. But office hours ended up being more of a one-on-one or two-on-one tutoring kind of model. And so that changed the dynamic. And so that's the way we handled that. And that time crunch didn't become as much an issue. A great question.
Okay. Yeah. Next question. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a few questions left, but anytime you want to stop, let me know and we can forward these questions to you for later.
We're just fine.
All right. Do you limit courses you support to high need and prerequisite courses, or do you offer help with any class requested by faculty and or students? Also, do your tutors cover multiple courses such as math, physics, and engineering, or do they specialize?
Yes to all of that. And so let me break that down a little bit. Our SI program before, we started out with high DFW classes, and then kind of focused that and then worked with departments to kind of identify that. Well, that really didn't work as well for us. You might be shocked to learn. What we did instead was I reformatted it as PASS, and we opened it up to faculty telling me what classes they felt were gateways to their majors or departments or organizations, and to make sure that we were supporting the right classes with a combination of high DFW rates. That worked better because then I had faculty skin in the game. When it came to multiple tutors covering multiple sections, absolutely. So one of the things I didn't talk about was our tutoring on demand. Right now, we've got math tutors and STEM tutors and SI leaders and all of these various things. Some of them do double up. Course mentors who are only getting 5 hours a week, I let them have 2 classes if they want. And sometimes they're in different departments. Tutors, we keep a list of the classes they want to tutor. And then we keep a list of classes that if pushed, they could do it. And then we use that separate list for when a student comes in and says, look, man, I'm struggling in Introduction to Underwater Basket Weaving 2, and I need some help. And so we look for one of our tutors who can do that, and we have them work with that student. Often my writing consultants and presentation consultants are able to help with study skills in ways that maybe we didn't think of before. And so we've repurposed them in certain ways during certain hours of the day. So yeah, there's a lot of that give and take going on. And that becomes a real management issue behind the scenes. So I've got massive spreadsheets on all of these tutor specialty areas, where what's their primary role and what they can do as a secondary role. That's really important when you're supporting TRIO or you're supporting disability support services on campus and you've got things that just happen during the semester. Great question.
All right, and next one. Although many student employees return each semester because they enjoy the position, do you implement any employee appreciation during the semester that enhances their experience and increases the chance to retain them aside from the employee awards at the end of the semester?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I was going to unpack that a little bit more and I just didn't. We have every couple of weeks, I send out superlatives. So just like everyone probably here on this call, you have a survey that goes out at the end of your tutoring consultation, whatever. And what do you think? And any good comments that are left, I share in our my weekly newsletter. I have an I call it my almost weekly newsletter, and it starts out with superlatives. These are things that we're hearing. If faculty send me good news about students and what they're hearing, I share that as well, so that everyone knows that people are getting pat on the back, and this is a good thing. The graduate assistants who help me with supervision will often select a tutor of the month or an SI leader of the month, and we share that, and I give them a gift card to the bookstore or Starbucks coffee and a stuffed animal. We have a bear mascot, so I give them that. And then at the end of the semester, they get a little bit more for that tutor of the year. So yeah, we do. If that's a constant feedback loop in that as well. There's one thing I will say that I do too that I haven't done in a while, but since COVID, it works real well. Is I'll call them for a big meeting, say this is a must-come meeting, and then instead of really talking about this egregious thing that I sent out and said this is what we need to discuss, we have a party instead and watch movies and do silly things. And what it does is really builds their camaraderie in there. And I really enjoyed that part of it. And I'm not good at it. I wish I was better at it. But those are all of the things that we do right now to kind of help build that.
All right, awesome. And next question, how do you create a comfortable and professional atmosphere in virtual interview settings? I find that it can be harder to create small talk and have similar moments to what we would in person.
Boy, you are right. And that was a nightmare during COVID, wasn't it? But I'm still doing it with graduate assistants. Often they're at other schools who are applying for an assistantship. That's where I see that most often. But we also have satellite campuses in West Plains, Missouri, for instance, which is a couple hours away. And I treat it the same way, except for the Zoom meeting. I take the background that you see behind me away, and I let them see my office. And sometimes I will come into the conversation late. I always lock them out and let them in. And I watch as they come in and they settle in. I think that's really interesting. But you do lose some things, right? You're losing a lot of that body language. So I really address it much more informal at that point. I don't wear a suit and tie. I don't look like I'm ready. I'll drink coffee the whole time with something that says, like this one says, carefully you'll end up in my novel. I have another one that says, I'm judging you by what you say and your grammar while you talk, and these sorts of things. And I'm really purposeful about it, but I will talk to them about anything that they want to talk about. I'll look at their background and say, what's going on behind you? I often ask, what in the world made you want to come to Missouri? I mean, these sorts of things, all of a sudden they react differently in the way that I say it. So a lot of that's personality driven. That's hard to answer.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's hard. It's hard to know what works for every person. Next question, how can this model work for junior colleges?
Junior colleges have a bigger challenge because their rotation is so high, right?
That was my experience too.
What I don't know if you do this, but I didn't mention this at all because it was another wrinkle in all of this. My learning center also works with dual credit. So all of our dual credit feeder schools are potential employees of the learning center. Now, we don't hire in our learning center, we don't hire first semester students. We want them to survive a semester at Missouri State before you're eligible to work in any of the fields. So for like writing center, presentation center, you have to be a junior, senior, grad student. But for the others, if they've taken one of our target classes and got a faculty referral in an A or B, they're automatically eligible. When we look at that sort of models with our tutoring, for instance, sometimes we like to get them because they've tested into calculus. I mean, why wouldn't we want them in our math table? So in a lot of cases, I've been doing workshops with our dual credit high schools on training their own learning centers. And that really changed our dynamic a little. I have 7 schools right now I work with that have their own tutoring centers. And I tell those students that if you come to our school because you're an A+ student and you've already been tutoring or you work here, let's talk, because you could be eligible to work for us your first semester. That helped. Junior college, my wife works at a junior college. She teaches at one and she's an advisor. And she works a lot with their learning center. And they have a lot more professionals in their space, but that's more expensive. And many of your schools are going, yeah, we're not getting that kind of money. So my big driver for that would be the dual credit students, working with a lot of those dual credit faculty to help you identify that. And I do send a letter to all of our dual credit faculty to send me names of students they know who are attending Missouri State. Can I recruit them now? Sometimes I can get them in for interviews during the summer before they've even gone to SOAR. That's a little harder and would take more time, but it's worth it in the end. I don't get many of those. I may have 7 or 8 out of the 120 that I get that way, but I could see that working pretty well for a junior college. I could also see you working really close with the faculty in there and the advisors. One of our feeder schools is Ozark Technical Community College nearby that has a group of specialized, how could I describe it, as advisors called navigators for each college. And those navigators understand the academics behind certain majors at their technical college. So in being in contact with those faculty and the drivers with those navigators tells me a lot about those students too, and we're able to recruit from that group as well. Whew, that's a lot.
All right. And this one I think is pretty straightforward. She asked, do you do your fall hiring in May or do you wait until August?
I do my fall hiring starting mid-March and get it done by May 4, usually.
Wow.
This time. My spring tutoring hiring starts in mid-October and I'm done by December 1 roughly. For summer, I only use folks who are spring tutors who will continue to fall and don't hire.
All right. And how much turnover do you experience from fall to spring terms?
Not much. It is rare that we have SI leaders drop until they graduate. Subject area tutors, I think our math table has a little bit higher turnover rate, but on average, like for the writing center, I usually lose in spring maybe a quarter of them. For the past leaders, I usually lose maybe about the same, about 25%. Subject area tutors, the biggest problem that we have with that is if they're only by appointment, if they're not getting any appointments, they're not making any money, they don't want to come back. So that's the highest turnover. And I think that the biggest issue there tends to be that there's an expectation that they see the Learning Commons as busy. Why aren't they individually busy? And so we turn a lot of them into course mentors or past leaders later, and then they can moonlight as tutors on the side. That helped the turnover rate really lessen. So usually graduation is what gets me, unless they're studying for the MCAT and they want a semester where all they can do is stare at a book. Then I might lose one in their last semester. But for the most part, my turnover is relatively lower than you'd expect. And that's because I think early on, it was all driven by the faculty and that connection that they've made for me. Rachel, you still there?
Yep, sorry, I accidentally hit the mute button twice, so I unmuted and then muted myself.
I thought it was me.
So the next question, this is, I believe, a follow-up. It's not by the same person, but I believe it's a follow-up to the question about what if you reach out to a student who was recommended by faculty and they don't respond. It says, what if they just respond when the semester is about to begin?
Well, I mean, if I've already hired, which by that point I would have already moved on. So I would have said, thank you, really interested in talking to you maybe next semester. And I keep their name in a file that says that they were either late applicants and faculty were really interested. And I'll give you an example. I had one just yesterday. The BMS faculty, biomedical sciences faculty got together and they sent me a list of names and I've done all the hiring. They've done all the approvals, that we're in paperwork stages now, we're done. And then they said, oh, wait, we've got another one. I said, well, I've already hired everybody. And they go, but we really, really love him. And so what we're doing with him is I'm going to talk to him next week, and I'm going to use him for kind of a support person behind the scenes. I have maybe 3 or 4 openings for this, where I have student ringers who actually go out and attend some of these large SI sessions, because it's impossible for some of them to know all 300 students in that session, but have them pop in and do an evaluation for us. Or you do use the writing center and bring in a paper and act like they don't know anything about it, and then they do an evaluation of their services, my secret shoppers. So sometimes I'll use them for that. In other cases, if I can't hire them because I'm just out of positions, and if they're work study, we'll use them for anything else. We'll use them for study skills specialists. We'll use them to support the academic coaches. Anything that I can do to keep them interested so that I can keep them on. Failing that, they just go in the file and they are contacted the next semester when I have an opening.
All right. And the next question is, do you communicate directly with faculty or always reach out to them through the department?
Always directly with faculty. After I've got a department head approval, everybody's happy with that, I go straight to my faculty. I'd rather know the faculty personally. I'd rather get to know them in a different way. I go to their offices. I am constantly, if I'm in that building, I stop by and say hi and bring them a t-shirt or something. It's always part of it, directly with faculty. If it's a new class, like our accounting class, I work with the department head first and then talked about that. They liked the idea. So then I reached out to faculty she thought might be interested, and that really built the program that way.
Okay. And have you had a problem with the ego-driven appeals resulting in arrogance on the job?
Sure. Why not, right? But a lot of that works out during the training, in many ways. I don't know if, especially SI leaders, if they know what they're getting into until they actually see it happen. It's different for some of these high achieving students who we hire to say, well, yeah, I went to a pre-test session and we did worksheets or whatever. That's not really what most of the SI sessions are like, right? And so I do a lot of demos. We have experienced leaders come into training and run these demo sessions, and it really does change that dynamic. More than that, faculty don't tend to send me a lot of students like that. Now, I don't get me wrong, God, I've had it more than my share. But for the most part, the training changes that a little bit. And during the discussion, I tell them I need them because they have specialized knowledge, right? But what's the SI model tell us, for instance? You're redirecting a lot of questions. So technically, I've never had a chemistry class. I ought to be able to run one, and I have run one, even with my touchy-feely group hug degrees. But they're going to catch me eventually, right? They're going to catch me because I don't know the material like that student who just had the class does. I want a little bit of that. But what I need to see in the interview is that personality really come through. Who are they when we take that veneer off? So everything that I do is designed to throw them off a little bit, get them to be a little more creative, and engage me in a way that makes more sense. A formal interview will just breed that arrogance.
All right. And this one, another pretty straightforward question. What is the average number of hours, or hopefully straightforward, what is the average number of hours your STEM tutors work each week?
Drop-in tables, we ask them to work no less than 5 and no more than 20 hours a week. And most of the people we're hiring at the tables are about a dozen hours. For subject area tutoring, one-on-one appointments, they give us a span of when they're available, and then the appointments are made 24 hours in advance, and then the students meet in the bear claw and they work together. And those are hit and miss depending on the subject. Writing center consultants that get shift work, so do presentation center consultants. So feast or famine, they're going to work their shifts, and most of the folks are working about 15 hours there. And then, of course, past leaders and SI leaders, course mentors, 5 to 10 hours, 12 hours if they're doing a pre-test session. So most of our student workers, especially when they're repurposed, are working up to their maximum 20.
All right. And what do you do about tutors that miss training?
That's always going to happen, right? Our band, for instance, has it's marching band practice Thursday, Friday before the semester, which is when I run training. So the first thing I tell them is training is Thursday, Friday before the semester. Can you make it? And if I've got anyone else who can make it, they're hired before the person who cannot, because I cannot do 16 hours of SI leader training, for instance, in one afternoon. And so we also have a training class that is free for them. It is an upper division leadership course that they can take. And we front load a lot of workshop videos and activities that they can do that my experienced leaders help them walk them through. That helps with it when I have to hire that person. I also do a pickup one a week after. So on the Saturday after classes start, I have a one-day crash course that takes a lot of the study skills portions out of it and really focuses on your day-to-day activity. I can't get away around that. It's always going to be that problem. And because I'm only, one human doing this training, I can't farm this out. So I've got to find creative ways to do it. So the training begins the moment they're hired. We have some training videos and articles that they walk through. We've got some workbooks that they work through during the summer at their leisure, which they normally do last minute. And then they come in for their training crash course. For writing consultants and tutors who I cannot get to before semester, they observe for a week. So they report for their hours at the tables or in the centers, and they watch experienced folks in action, work with our leads in that. And then at the end, they meet with me, they tell me, put me in coach, and we flip the models so that by week 3, everybody's running. That's what you do when you've got limited professional staff.
And our next question, it looks like we just have a couple left. What type of mandatory training do you provide for tutors?
Orientation training is usually a day-long thing, 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours. Then the training course that they take in their first semester, and it is repeatable their second semester, called Interdisciplinary Studies 310 Leadership. And it looks on their transcript as a leadership requirement. All of them in their various units have bi-weekly meetings with their discipline heads. So BMS leaders, SI leaders will meet with one of the folks who's worked with me for a while to walk through problems. The GAs usually run those meetings. Once a month, we have an all meeting that we call everyone in, usually on an afternoon off or an early evening, and we feed them or whatever. And they it's a mixer for maybe a couple hours to talk about problems and situations. We have pickup trainings for things, especially in specialty areas. So like a writing consultant suddenly is encountering APA for the first time, or CBE or CSE or ASR, or Chicago to Arabian, or something faculty made up, or we got big papers coming in and things like that. We have mini pickup workshops. So I'm running these workshops constantly throughout the semester as well, and they're regularly scheduled to meet most of their schedules. We're still going to miss people, and in a lot of cases, the class has an online component that enables them to check in and to really talk with their leads in their areas. I hope that helped. That's a lot. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but let's see. Okay, what's the typical enrollment your faculty see in each of their classes? I love the idea of getting faculty more involved in our hiring process, but our class sizes are typically 150 to 200 students in each section, so they don't typically get to make a ton of connections with students.
Yeah, they don't, but let's be honest. They always know the really good ones and the really bad ones, and the rest of them blend in between, right? That's usually the case, but it becomes a feedback loop. You start having students coming to these sessions, then they're curious about the program, they ask their faculty about it. We have seen that grow as the program develops. And so what's really been beneficial for us is that faculty are involved. For my large lecture-based courses that we're supporting with SI, the enrollment, DMS 307, anatomy, 308 physiology, was 333 plus, and at one point they did 600 per section, and we're projecting a faculty member to a different room, and just insane things like, how does anyone know anyone? And what it ended up being was that the leaders also drove a lot of that. So when they had good people in their sessions, we were recruiting them. Just like the training for SI might tell you, you get a good person who says, you know, I got an A in my first test, thanks to you. I'm not coming back. You're like, why don't you come back and help me lead these sessions? I've managed to cultivate that relationship in such a way where they talk to their faculty members about the program, and suddenly I get those referrals again. But I also rely a lot of referrals on my student employees, and that works really well. Good question. What's the average enrollment? I couldn't say. It varies so wildly across the spectrum. Our accounting classes are about 70 to 80. Anatomy, physiology, biomedical sciences, 100 to 300. Chemistry, 70 or 80. And then you start drilling down to things like agriculture, where we had 30. Those were easier for faculty to get. In a lot of cases, faculty who don't know their students personally, I recommend that they message the academic advisors in their program. Many of our programs at Missouri State have academic advisors for that program, and we are implementing a model where every college will have its own advisement center starting in the next year, and I'm going to leverage that to help me get more employees, because there's that personal one-on-one touch again.
All right, and I think that it looks like the last of the questions. Thank you
Okay.
so much for the generosity of your time today. We had a good chunk of people stay. I know we're pretty well past the end of the session time, but I hope everybody found this session to be very helpful. Again, for those of you who are still remaining, when you leave, you will be redirected to a survey. Of course, we really appreciate your feedback. And if you have any questions, let us know. And we will be sending out this recording along with the materials that Michael provided within the next couple of business days. And of course, to Michael, I want to say thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you, and we hope to connect with you again soon. And thank you again.
Thank you, guys. And I want to say this before I go. If you need anything, my contact information's up there. Feel free to message me. I can send you anything I've got material-wise that isn't in the packet you'll get.
All right. Awesome. And thank you everyone again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Happy hiring.